Hello, my name is Alex Page, and today I'm going to be talking about ARD, Agile Requirements Designer, which is our model-based testing solution. All right, let's jump right into it. So ARD, again, this is a model-based testing tool. And what we will do is we will start with our requirements, our user stories, our written requirements, and we will translate those requirements in ARD to a visual model. Now, I'm going to use the Visio-like interface of ARD to create this model. And from that model, I can systematically generate my test cases that go through the model to give me a full functional coverage of whatever it is I'm modeling, whether it's an API or a UI or any kind of component of an application. I will systematically generate my test cases from the model, and anytime anything changes, I just update the model and regenerate my tests. So that's essentially where ARD fits into the picture. Before we get any further with ARD itself, let's talk about some of the challenges that are preventing us from achieving continuous testing and in-sprint testing. Everyone's moving towards becoming more agile, but what are the problems we're facing? Well, requirements are still ambiguous by nature, whether they're in lengthy Word documents or concise user stories. The nature of trying to discuss and communicate how a system should behave with plain English is prone to error, and a lot of time is spent on clarifying those ambiguous requirements. Additionally, the process of test design and test creation and a test execution, whether it's manual or automated, this testing phase is a very time-consuming process and hard to fit in a 2-week iteration, 2-week sprint. And lastly, most of our testing today is still manual. There's a high barrier of entry to moving towards automation. Automation scripting is a more advanced skill set that not everyone in QA has. So there's barriers of entry for us to get towards automation, but it's where we want to go. Because if we're truly going to be agile, then we need to do everything in 2 weeks. Within our sprint iterations, we need to agree on the requirements, we need to develop the code, we need to test whatever it is we're implementing, and everything else that goes along with the software development lifecycle from process to compliance. Doing all of that in 2 weeks is hard, and testing is typically the thing that we push out. But if we're truly going to be agile, we need to achieve, create, design, and execute our tests within the sprint that component or feature is implemented. So a lot of the testing that we do to account for this lack of time results in us having kind of an upside down pyramid, and we're very UI heavy in the types of tests that we come up with, and very end-to-end focused because quite frankly there's just not a lot of time to come up with exhaustive tests for each component. What we'd like to do is flip this pyramid where we're testing earlier, we're testing continuously, we're finding things much quicker. But how do we do this? How do we flip this pyramid? Essentially, and why are things like this? Why is testing this laborious, error-prone, time-consuming task? Well, there are a lot of steps, quite frankly. There's a lot to testing. We typically will take the requirements, we'll interpret them, have back and forth discussions on what they actually mean. The developers go code, and then QA starts designing their test cases. This is a very time-consuming process. It takes a long time to think about every possibility of something that could happen and come up with a test case for it. Then I need to find the test data I need. If we're moving towards automation, I need to write my automation script, deal with all the testing logistics, and then finally I get to execute my test cases. But this kind of mini waterfall in the middle is one of the main reasons that it's hard for us to achieve in sprint testing. So what ARD seeks to do is go from the requirements, which are then represented in a visual model, directly to test execution. And it does that by automating this middle layer as much as it can. So let's talk a little bit more about ARD. I've talked about models being a central component of ARD. It is model-based testing. What is a model? Essentially, you could think of a model as, again, a visual representation of the variance in things that could happen, variance in input or states of an underlying database, variance of things that can occur, and then how those should map to expected results, as in what should our application do as a result. And when you put those two kind of high-level ideas together, you get a model. So I will use ARD and I will use its interface to create these models very quickly by simply dragging blocks onto the canvas, adding a little bit of metadata, test data and automation to just those blocks. Once I've got it all connected up, I can systematically generate the test cases through it. So I hit a button and I get my test cases. So design of tests is now completely an automated and more importantly, a programmatic, a systematic process that happens in a matter of seconds with ARD. I can very quickly respond to the impact of change if a requirement changes. I can not just generate and design my test steps, but in addition to that, the test data and the automation assets necessary to actually execute those scripts. So I go from requirements to a model like you see on the screen here, and with a few clicks of a button, I can get to actual executable tests. So where does ARD fit into the picture? Kind of a different take on that first slide. Again, we start with our requirements, we translate those to a model, and then as far as what we integrate with downstream, there really is no limit. I can integrate ARD with any automation framework, whether it's Selenium, Protractor, Gherkin Cucumber, even custom frameworks, keyword driven or otherwise. The automation layer in ARD is completely agnostic, so there is no limit to what I can integrate with. So essentially, we take that middle tier of the slide I showed earlier, where we're essentially doing a waterfall version of these steps to this idea of maintaining, uh, curating my models in ARD, and systematically and automatically generating everything I need from test data to automation scripts in order to validate whatever it is I'm responsible for testing. Further, we deal with complex applications. So ARD has a kind of a modular-based approach with subflows as a way to organize our models and to reuse common components. So handling complex applications is something that is just a part of our reality, and ARD has been created with that in mind. The question comes down to, what would we rather maintain? A model which is fluid by nature and easy to change, or X number of test cases that can become invalidated once things change, and I have to maintain each test on a per test basis and possibly change the test data or update the automation script. Do I want to do anything on a per test basis if I don't have to, if instead I can just maintain a model and everything else is generated? So let's take a look at a quick demo. I have a live running application that I've booted locally, which is an online banking application that I'm responsible for testing. One of the things I can do in this online banking application is create a new savings account. A very simple form, but there is some business requirements surrounding this. If I choose money market, then my minimum deposit is increased to $2,500 versus the $25 for savings account. I can choose joint or individual, put in my account name, and then this is where I would declare my initial deposit. If I'm missing fields, I get errors, and if I try to create, say, a money market account with an insufficient initial deposit, again, I will get an error. And that's one of the business rules in my user story that I need to validate in my testing. So here I'm popping over to Rally. Here's my user story. So now I'm going to switch to ARD. So I've already created this model, and this model represents that web page. It is a representation of the requirements of the different rules around each field, the initial deposits depending on the type of account that I'm creating, and this is the visual representation of those requirements. How did I create this model? Well, I simply drag on blocks to the canvas and connect them up however they should be, whether that's sequential, chronological, or whatever makes sense in the specific use case of what I'm modeling. So here I've already done the modeling, but you can see it's very much like Visio, drag and drop, define my outputs, wire it up. Now, we talk about the ability to generate test cases through this model. So as you can see here, I'm representing the different account types here and the rules associated. And here I'm I'm establishing some variance in the amounts I might put in that initial deposit field to make sure that when I put an insufficient amount, I don't create an account. And when I put a sufficient amount, then I do create an account. So again, a representation of the rules of how the application should perform under a variance of inputs. So I wire this model up and I can then go into the test generation capability, choose my optimization to meet my testing goal, and boom, ARD will generate my tests for me. In this case, I have 21 tests, just like that. So it's found all the pathways through this with a pairwise coverage through this model, and it's designed all of my test cases for me. Awesome. I can go ahead and save those tests, give it a dynamic naming template for the test case names. And now when I pop over to the View tab, I can see all of those saved test cases with that naming template populated. And I've got my tests. Now, if I go a step further and I were to layer on some test data and automation to this model, again, not on a per test basis, on a model basis, which is much quicker, then I can enrich the quality of what ARD will produce. So for instance, if I zoom in on this block here and I add test data to the individual outputs of this block, which you can see represented here, I can do things like take advantage of a dynamic data painter expression builder, which is basically a fancy way for saying that I can generate synthetic test data to meet my testing goal. So in this case, the output of 25, I've just hard-coded 25. In the case of 0 through 24, I'm generating a random number between 0 and 24. We can generate social security numbers, email addresses, you name it. We handle the test data as much as we should in the design time phase of your test creation. So I can layer on that metadata very quickly, as I have already done here. And now if I take a look at the automation side of things, again, just on a block and output level, I can layer on automation. So if I, again, at the output level, if I go into the automation tab and add different pieces of automation that I might want at this particular level, then I can take advantage of ARD's ability to string together that automation in the order that it traverses my model. So I can do things like aligning the test data that I just showed you to populate the parameters of my automation and save it just like that. So again, very quick, and then what I get as a result is if I pop back over to my test generator, my Path Explorer, and I go to those same test cases that I just saved, I can now export the automation. And in this case, I am generating Serenity Gherkin to run through Cucumber. Now we can see that from my 21 tests, I actually have a feature file that ARD is generating by making use of that automation and that test data that I just showed. So now we have a feature file for all 21 of my tests that I can go run. So if we go ahead and start that execution, I'm going to run that exported automation. And again, I'm running my that feature file through my typical Cucumber framework, but I'm also using Serenity, which is another BDD framework that gives me some more acceptance test driven reporting, which is kind of nice. But again, I could have chosen anything, and I could have done raw Java Selenium. I could have done a custom framework automation. I could have done a CSV output that I would then feed in somewhere. In this case, I chose Gherkin Cucumber for what ARD outputs. And that was my choice. And indeed, I can see here that my tests that ARD generated for me have indeed all ran. Again, making use of that Serenity reporting I talked about. And we can see that indeed, the model that I created has yielded me a very useful and executable set of tests. In this case, a negative test where I have attempted to use an insufficient initial balance for a money market account. So that is my test that ARD generated actually executing Where they execute is irrelevant. What test framework you use is irrelevant. ARD doesn't care. It's agnostic. So let's say that now I'm feeling pretty good about those tests and I'm ready to export them out to Rally. I showed you that user story earlier, and here you can see there are no test cases associated to that user story in Rally, but I have tests and I'm ready to go ahead and export, and I will go ahead and load up the Rally connector in ARD. I will choose my user story, and I will go ahead and um, attach my Gherkin script as well and start that export. And I'll get a notification indicating that that export has indeed started. And once the export has finished, ARD will let me know again on the bottom right. If I flip back to that user story, I now have those 21 test cases that, again, ARD generated, exported successfully into Rally. Along with those tests come the automation scripts that ARD generated as attachments, as well as a path image that I can take a look at the grayed out view of this path for this individual test case through my larger model. So now that I've done this, I've got my system of record update with my test cases that I've generated. I've proven that they are actually executable tests coming out of my model. But what happens in the real world? Well, things change. That's what happens. And a requirement is one thing one day, and it may evolve during the sprint. It may change the next release, but things change. So I've created this model, but let's say that when the new requirement is that when I've, as a user, created a regular savings account, that I'm then offered a promotion that I can accept or deny as a user. So I will go ahead and make that modification to this model. And then I will define my outputs, and that would be that I either accept or deny as a user the promotion that I'm offered. I'll make that a user interaction block type, and I've got my block on the canvas. And simply connect up my outputs. And in this case, whether or not they accept or deny, we will consider that a passed test. So I will just have those two outputs coming down to the end block here. Now, what I've done here is made a change to a model where I already had generated tests. So the tests that went through this branch of the model we're traversing a path which no longer exists in my model since I've added this block here. Now this gets into the test case maintenance side of things. If I come into these tests that I've already stored, ARD recognizes that 4 of those tests were impacted by the change I just made, and I can very easily just systematically repair those 4 paths. Furthermore, since I've added a new functionality to this model, I can generate the net new tests that I would need to cover this additional change in the model. In this case, I just need one additional path, and I will go ahead and maybe append the word new here so I can see this guy. And when I pop over here, I'm now bumped up to 22, and I can see that net new test at the end here where I'm covering the promotion denial path of this model. So again, test case maintenance in a few button clicks, incremental model updates extremely fast. With ARD, I'm really automating so much of that test design and test creation layer that I can truly become agile and I can achieve continuous testing. All right, that is my demo for today. Thank you for your time, and please let us know if you'd like to learn more about ARD.